The sun blazed down on Silver Springs as Naomi Blackwell stood silently, her wrists bound in cold steel handcuffs. The two officers in front of her smirked, their authority on full display. Around them, the city moved in slow motion as onlookers paused, their phones capturing every second of the scene. "You're not going to talk your way out of this," Officer Bradley said, his tone smug and dripping with prejudice. "Women like you always think you're smarter than the law." Naomi's expression didn't flinch. Her gaze met Bradley's, calm and unyielding. "You've made a mistake," she said quietly. Bradley chuckled, leaning closer. "Mistake? The only mistake is thinking you're special." The crowd grew restless, whispers of confusion and anger rising with each moment. Naomi's calm composure only seemed to provoke Bradley further. "You'll understand soon enough," Naomi said, her voice steady. "Oh, I will?" Bradley shot back, laughing. "What, you've got a fancy lawyer coming to save you?" Naomi's response sent a ripple through the air, cutting the smugness like a blade. "I don't need a lawyer. Tomorrow you'll stand in my courtroom." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Bradley blinked, the words hanging heavy in the air. Carter, the younger officer, stiffened beside him, his face betraying sudden uncertainty. "What did you say?" Bradley barked, his bravado faltering. Naomi didn't move. "You'll find out tomorrow," she said, her voice calm yet commanding. Inside the precinct, the truth was revealed with a single click of the sergeant's keyboard. The room froze as Naomi Blackwell's profile appeared. Justice of the Peace, presiding judge of Silver Springs Municipal Court. Bradley's face paled. He had cuffed a judge. Tomorrow he wouldn't just face Naomi, he'd face justice itself. The streets of Silver Springs buzzed with activity. Vendors called out their wares, cars honked in the midday traffic, and people moved through the city with purpose. In the midst of this lively chaos, two figures strode with an air of dominance. Officer Bradley and Officer Carter. Known across the community for their heavy-handed tactics, the two officers carried themselves with unchecked confidence. Locals whispered about their reputation for targeting individuals they deemed suspicious, but few dared to challenge them. On this particular day, their attention was drawn to a woman stepping out of a sleek black sedan near City Hall. Naomi Blackwell, her crisp navy suit, adorned with a perfectly folded pocket square, gleamed under the sunlight. Polished leather shoes clicked against the pavement as she walked with the steady confidence of a woman accustomed to success. In her hand was a well-worn leather briefcase, a testament to years of hard work. Her calm stride and quiet authority turned heads, but to Bradley and Carter, her polished demeanor was not a mark of respectability. It was, in their eyes, a red flag. "Look at this woman," Bradley muttered to Carter, his tone laced with suspicion. "What's she doing around here?" Carter shrugged, but his eyes narrowed. "Doesn't look like she belongs." They exchanged a glance, their decision unspoken but clear. Bradley quickened his pace, his hand instinctively brushing the holster of his weapon. "Ma'am, stop right there." The commanding bark cut through the city's noise. Naomi halted mid-step, turning slowly to face the officers. There was a flicker of disbelief in her eyes, but it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by calm composure. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady and measured. Bradley's eyes narrowed, his stance firm. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching yours involved in a theft nearby." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation. May I see the report?" The simple question seemed to irritate Bradley. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice rising. As Naomi complied, a quiet resolve settled over her. The tension in the air was palpable, but she didn't falter. Bradley's voice cut through the bustling street. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." Naomi's calm demeanor didn't waver. "Obstruction? I've simply asked for clarification on the accusation." "Enough talking," Bradley snapped, grabbing Naomi's arm. Carter stepped forward, glancing around at the gathering crowd. Passers-by slowed, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. A few people pulled out their phones, the soft chime of recording apps breaking the uneasy silence. "This is harassment," Naomi said firmly, though her tone remained measured. "And I assure you, you will regret this." Bradley tightened his grip, clearly provoked. "Regret it? You're not in a position to make threats." Naomi allowed herself to be cuffed, her movements deliberate, as if to make every action visible to the growing crowd. "This isn't a threat, it's a promise," she said quietly. Carter hesitated. "Bradley, maybe we should—" "No!" Bradley cut him off, glaring. "Protocol is protocol." The crowd grew restless as Naomi was led toward the squad car. Voices murmured, some questioning the officer's actions. "What did she even do?" a woman asked, holding her phone steady to capture every detail. "She doesn't look like a criminal," another man muttered. Bradley shot the crowd a sharp look. "Keep moving, nothing to see here." But the phones kept recording. Naomi glanced over her shoulder as they reached the car. "You're making a grave mistake. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." Bradley laughed coldly, shoving Naomi into the back seat. "We'll see about that, tough lady." The ride to the precinct was tense. Naomi sat silently, her gaze steady on the road ahead. Bradley, eager to fill the silence, glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You think staying quiet makes you look innocent?" Naomi didn't respond. Her silence seemed to unnerve them both. Carter shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat, his hands fidgeting. When they arrived at the precinct, Naomi was marched through the front doors. The officers ignored her request for a phone call, choosing instead to revel in their supposed victory. "You think you're special?" Bradley sneered, taking Naomi's briefcase and placing it on the desk. "You're just another arrest, a number in our books." Naomi stood straight, her expression calm. "We'll see how long that number stays in your books," she said evenly. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Officers whispered among themselves, glancing at the composed woman in cuffs. Naomi's quiet defiance contrasted sharply with Bradley and Carter's arrogance. Through the glass walls, the sergeant on duty watched with a raised eyebrow. Something about Naomi's presence didn't sit right. Meanwhile, the crowd outside grew louder. Videos of the arrest were already making waves online. Within minutes, hashtags like #Justice for Naomi and #racial profiling trended on social media. Local activists rallied, demanding accountability. Inside, Bradley and Carter remained oblivious. "Bet she cracks in an hour?" Bradley said with a smirk. Carter hesitated, his confidence waning. "What if she doesn't?" Bradley waved him off. "They always do." But as Naomi sat in the holding cell, her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't going to crack. The precinct hummed with its usual noise. Ringing phones, the shuffle of papers, and muffled conversations. But near the holding cells, the atmosphere was different. Bradley and Carter were still gloating, their voices carrying a smug confidence that grated against the tension in the room. "Guess she's not such a big shot now," Bradley said, leaning against the desk where Naomi's belongings had been placed. Carter managed a weak chuckle, though his unease was more apparent now. "Yeah, maybe." In the cell, Naomi sat with an air of quiet authority, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Her gaze was steady, piercing through the bars and unsettling anyone who dared meet it. The sergeant, still watching from the sidelines, decided to approach. "You've been quiet," he said, trying to sound casual but unable to hide his curiosity. "Most people would be yelling by now?" Naomi turned her gaze toward the sergeant, her voice calm but commanding. "I don't need to yell. I need to make a phone call." The sergeant smirked. "And why's that? Got someone important to call?" Naomi stood, her posture straight and unwavering. "I have court tomorrow, and I need to prepare." Bradley overheard and scoffed. "What? You think you can defend yourself? You think some lawyer's gonna save you?" Naomi's next words cut through the noise like a blade. "No, I don't need a lawyer. I am the judge." Silence fell over the precinct. Bradley froze mid-sneer, his face slowly registering confusion. "What did you just say?" Naomi stepped closer to the bars, her gaze locked on Bradley. "I am the presiding judge for Silver Springs Municipal Court. Tomorrow I'll be the one sitting at the bench." The sergeant's smirk vanished. His eyes darted toward the desk where Naomi's briefcase sat, his mind scrambling to process the claim. Without a word, he turned to the nearest computer, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The room remained eerily quiet as the sergeant's expression shifted from curiosity to shock. The screen displayed Naomi's profile. Justice of the Peace, Presiding Judge, Silver Springs Municipal Court. The sergeant turned to Bradley and Carter, his voice low. She's telling the truth. Carter's face went pale, his nervous fidgeting stopping entirely. You're kidding, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Bradley's confidence faltered. He took a step back, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words. This doesn't change anything. Naomi tilted her head slightly, her calm demeanor unshaken. It changes everything. The sergeant stood frozen for a moment before he turned to Bradley. You've made a serious mistake, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. Outside, the noise from the growing crowd seeped into the precinct. The videos had gone viral, and the community was demanding answers. Bradley, still grasping for his bravado, muttered, "This is ridiculous. She's just trying to intimidate us." But the unease in the room was undeniable. The realization had hit everyone. This wasn't just another arrest. They hadn't detained a suspect. They had detained the judge. Naomi returned to her seat in the cell, her calm demeanor unchanged. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "you'll answer for this." The weight of her words hung in the air as the precinct descended into uneasy silence. The courtroom was packed. The air buzzed with tension as journalists, community members, and activists filled every available seat. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered into microphones, and spectators leaned forward in anticipation. At the defense table, officers Bradley and Carter sat stiffly, their usual confidence replaced by visible discomfort. Bradley's jaw was tight, his eyes darting nervously around the room, while Carter shifted uneasily in his chair. Then the doors opened. The noise in the room fell silent as Naomi Blackwell entered, dressed in her judicial robe. Her steps were deliberate, her expression calm yet commanding. The same woman they had mocked and humiliated now stood before them as the presiding judge. Naomi took her seat at the bench, her gaze sweeping over the room. She paused briefly when her eyes met Bradley's and Carter's, their faces pale with realization. "Court is now in session," Naomi announced, her voice firm and clear. The tension in the room grew as the charges were read. Racial profiling, unlawful arrest, and abuse of power. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her expression unwavering. "Officers Bradley and Carter, you stand accused of these charges. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Bradley swallowed hard, glancing at Carter for support. "Your Honor, we were acting on protocol," he began, his voice shaky. "We received a report about a vehicle matching her description." Naomi raised a hand, silencing him. "Protocol does not justify baseless accusations or fabricated charges. This court will examine the evidence to determine the validity of your actions." She gestured to the court technician, who began playing a video on the large screen. It was footage from the arrest, recorded by bystanders. The room watched intently as the video unfolded. It showed Naomi standing calmly as Bradley barked accusations and cuffed her without cause. The officer's mocking tone contrasted starkly with Naomi's composed demeanor. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some leaned closer to their screens, while others exchanged shocked glances. Naomi turned back to the officers. "This video highlights a troubling disparity in behavior. While I remained calm and compliant, you escalated without justification." Bradley shifted in his seat, visibly sweating. Carter avoided eye contact altogether. Next, witness testimonies were presented. One by one, community members recounted what they had seen. A local shopkeeper described how Naomi had been approached aggressively despite showing no signs of wrongdoing. A passerby testified to the officers' mocking laughter as they led her away in cuffs. Each testimony painted a damning picture, reinforcing the narrative of racial profiling and misconduct. The final blow came when Naomi's professional record was submitted as evidence. "Justice of the peace with an unblemished record and years of service to this community," the clerk read aloud. "Known for advocating reforms and fostering trust between law enforcement and citizens." The irony hung heavy in the air. Bradley and Carter, who had arrested her while she was on her way to meet the mayor about community reforms, were now the ones under scrutiny. Naomi maintained her professionalism, though a flicker of determination shone in her eyes. "This court values accountability," she said, addressing the audience and the officers. "No one is above the law, not even those tasked with enforcing it." The officers squirmed in their seats as murmurs spread through the gallery. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, and the courtroom was abuzz with anticipation for what would come next. Court will reconvene after a short recess, Naomi announced, standing and exiting with the same commanding presence she had entered with. The room erupted into a mix of whispers and hurried discussions. The story was far from over, but it was clear to everyone. The power dynamic had shifted, and justice was closing in. When the court reconvened, the tension was almost unbearable. Officers Bradley and Carter returned to their seats, their faces pale and their movements stiff. The weight of the evidence had visibly shaken them. The gallery was packed with eager onlookers, some with notebooks in hand, others with their phones ready to capture the next twist. Naomi Blackwell re-entered the courtroom, her judicial robe flowing as she took her place at the bench. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes carried a steely resolve. "Officers Bradley and Carter," Naomi began, her voice firm, "the court has reviewed the evidence and heard the testimonies. It is now time to address the charges against you." The room fell silent as the court technician played another key piece of evidence, a second video clip recorded during the arrest. This one captured Bradley mocking Naomi's request for clarification and Carter hesitating as if questioning their actions. The contrast between Naomi's dignity and the officer's behavior was stark. Bradley attempted to interrupt. "Your Honor, we were just following protocol." "Protocol," Naomi interjected, her tone sharp, "does not allow for fabrications or harassment. The justification you've offered does not align with the facts presented in this courtroom." The audience murmured in agreement. Naomi then addressed the community impact of the incident. The actions taken that day go beyond a personal injustice. They reflect a pattern that erodes trust between law enforcement and the people they are sworn to protect. Witness after witness had testified to the officer's pattern of targeting individuals unfairly, and the viral videos of Naomi's arrest had only added to the outrage. Bradley and Carter's defense crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. Naomi's gaze fixed on Carter. "Officer Carter, you've remained silent throughout much of this process. Do you have anything to say?" Carter hesitated, visibly struggling to find his words. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have done more. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't stop it." The confession sent a wave of murmurs through the room. Bradley shot Carter a furious glare, but said nothing. Naomi nodded slightly. "Acknowledging your failure is a step, but accountability requires action." She turned her attention back to Bradley. "Officer Bradley, you have shown no remorse, no recognition of the harm caused by your actions. This court finds you fully responsible for escalating the situation and fabricating accusations." The verdict was swift. "Officers Bradley and Carter, you are hereby suspended without pay, pending further investigation. The charges against you will be forwarded for review by an independent oversight committee." The gallery erupted in applause, some standing in ovation. Bradley slumped in his seat, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. Carter looked down, his expression one of regret. Naomi's voice cut through the noise as she addressed the courtroom. "Justice is not simply about punishment. It is about ensuring that the truth prevails and that those who wield power do so responsibly." As the gavel struck to adjourn the session, the crowd began to disperse, their conversations alive with hope and determination. The officers left the courtroom under a cloud of public scrutiny, their once dominant presence now overshadowed by shame. For Naomi, this was a victory not just for herself, but for the community. Yet she knew the fight for true justice was far from over. The aftermath of the trial sent ripples far beyond the walls of the courtroom. News of the officer's suspension and the viral videos of Naomi's arrest dominated headlines, sparking intense debates about racial profiling and police accountability. Public outrage grew, with protests organized across Silver Springs demanding broader systemic reforms. Officer Bradley's career effectively ended overnight. An internal investigation into his conduct unearthed years of complaints and allegations, which had been quietly buried by the department. This time, under the weight of public scrutiny, there was no hiding. The police chief, facing mounting pressure, announced Bradley's immediate termination. For Officer Carter, the outcome was different. His admission in court and cooperation during the investigation earned him a second chance. While he faced probation and mandatory retraining, his willingness to acknowledge his failure allowed him to avoid the same fate as Bradley. Naomi Blackwell, now a symbol of justice and resilience, took swift action. Using her judicial platform and newfound public support, she spearheaded a comprehensive initiative to reform the local police force. This is about more than one incident, she told reporters. It's about creating a system where accountability is the standard, not the exception. The reforms were ambitious. Naomi worked closely with city officials to develop mandatory bias training for officers, implement body cameras for all police interactions, and establish an independent oversight committee to review complaints and investigate misconduct. The community rallied behind Naomi's efforts. Activists, local leaders, and residents of all backgrounds came together, organizing town hall meetings and workshops to foster open dialogue between law enforcement and the people they served. This isn't just about punishment, Naomi said during a televised address. It's about rebuilding trust. It's about making sure no one else has to experience what I did. The movement quickly gained traction beyond Silver Springs. Other cities across the state began adopting similar reforms, inspired by Naomi's leadership and the widespread demand for change. Protests turned into celebrations as progress was made. The viral hashtags that once called for justice now celebrated reform. Signs that once read, "No justice, no peace," now carried messages of hope. Accountability is possible. Months later, Naomi reflected on the journey. The scars of injustice still lingered, but the progress was undeniable. She stood on the steps of City Hall, watching as a new class of police recruits filed into the academy. Each recruit had been carefully selected under the new reforms, their faces reflecting determination and hope. Naomi allowed herself a small, cautious smile. Change was slow, but it was happening. This isn't the end, she told herself quietly. It's just the beginning of something bigger. Gained traction beyond Silver Springs. Other cities across the state began adopting similar reforms, inspired by Naomi's leadership and the widespread demand for change. Protests turned into celebrations as progress was made. The viral hashtags that once called for justice now celebrated reform. Signs that once read, "No justice, no peace," now carried messages of hope. Accountability is possible. Months later, Naomi reflected on the journey. The scars of injustice still lingered, but the progress was undeniable. She stood on the steps of City Hall, watching as a new class of police recruits filed into the academy. Each recruit had been carefully selected under the new reforms, their faces reflecting determination and hope. Naomi allowed herself a small, cautious smile. Change was slow, but it was happening. This isn't the end, she told herself quietly. It's just the beginning of something bigger. The morning sun bathed the steps of City Hall in a warm glow as Naomi Blackwell stood quietly, hands clasped in front of her. Below, a diverse group of police recruits gathered, their faces a mix of nervous energy and determination. These recruits were the first to enter the force under the new reforms. Individuals chosen not just for their skills, but for their commitment to fairness and justice. Naomi's gaze softened as she observed them. Their presence represented a small but significant victory in a long battle for accountability. Change wasn't immediate, and the scars of past injustices were still fresh, but progress was visible in the hope reflected in the faces of the next generation of law enforcement. She turned to the small crowd gathered behind her, community leaders, activists, and everyday citizens who had stood with her throughout the ordeal. Their support had been instrumental in turning a moment of personal injustice into a movement for systemic change. Taking a deep breath, Naomi stepped forward to address the group. "This isn't just about fixing what's broken," she began, her voice steady and resolute. "It's about building something better, something that ensures justice isn't an uphill battle, but a foundation we can all stand on." The crowd nodded, their faces filled with a shared sense of purpose. Naomi continued, "What happened to me could have happened to anyone, but together we've shown that change is possible, that we can demand accountability, fairness, and respect, and that we can win." The recruits below began their march into the academy, their footsteps echoing on the stone steps. Naomi watched them disappear through the doors, a faint smile crossing her lips. The fight for justice was far from over, But for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt optimistic. Progress was slow, but each step forward made the struggle worthwhile. She turned back to the crowd and concluded, "Let's keep moving forward, together." As the applause grew, Naomi descended the steps, ready to face the challenges ahead. Justice wasn't just her mission, it was her legacy.